The restaurant was already closing when a little girl ran through the front doors crying, her pink backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Every conversation in the room stopped. At the far end of the dining area, a man named Callum Reed sat alone at a table, staring at the untouched cup of coffee in front of him. He had been waiting for a blind date he never wanted, wearing the only decent jacket he owned and trying to remember the last time he had sat across from a woman without worrying about whether his daughter had eaten dinner. But when that little girl suddenly appeared, everything changed. What Callum did next would leave an entire room silent, and by the end of that night, even the people who thought they knew him would see his heart differently. Before we continue, if you believe that kindness can change someone's life and that everyone deserves a second chance, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Epic Story Hub. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories like this to you. Callum Reed was 38 years old and had spent the last 6 years learning how to be both a father and a mother to his 8-year-old daughter, Juniper. His wife had died suddenly after an illness that had started with ordinary tiredness and ended with a hospital room that felt too quiet. Callum had never recovered completely. He simply learned how to keep moving. He packed Juniper's lunches, braided her hair badly, attended school meetings, worked long shifts at a small auto repair shop, paid bills late but honestly, and made sure there was always a bedtime story even when his own eyes could barely stay open. His world had become small, but inside that small world lived everything he loved. Callum had stopped believing in love for himself. He believed in love for Juniper, in the kind that made him wake before sunrise to prepare pancakes shaped like stars. He believed in love for his elderly neighbor, who needed groceries carried upstairs. He believed in love for strangers who were having bad days. But romantic love had become a locked door. He had no interest in opening it. That was why, when his sister Maribel secretly created a dating profile for him and arranged a blind date, Callum was furious. She had insisted that he needed someone who could understand his life, someone who would not expect him to become the carefree man he had been before losing his wife. After weeks of persuasion, Callum finally agreed to one dinner. One dinner, he promised himself, and then he could return to his ordinary life. That evening, he arrived at a quiet family restaurant just before sunset. The sunlight poured through the tall windows, turning the tables golden. Callum checked his phone repeatedly. The woman he was supposed to meet was named Seraphina Vale, and he knew almost nothing about her. He only knew she had agreed to the meeting through a mutual acquaintance. For 20 minutes, he sat there alone. Then 30 minutes passed. Then 40. He was about to leave when Seraphina finally arrived. She was wearing a simple cream-colored coat and carrying a small handbag. She looked nervous, almost frightened. She apologized for being late, explaining through her expression that something had happened before she arrived. Callum noticed immediately that her eyes were red, as if she had been crying. He did not ask questions. He simply pulled out the chair for her. The dinner began awkwardly. Neither of them knew what to say. Callum tried to smile, but his mind kept returning to Juniper, who was staying with Maribel for the evening. Seraphina kept glancing toward the restaurant entrance. She seemed distracted, almost as though she was waiting for someone else. Then the little girl came running through those same doors. Juniper. Callum stood so quickly that his chair scraped across the floor. Juniper was crying harder than he had ever seen her cry. Her cheeks were wet, and one of the straps on her backpack had broken. She ran directly into her father's arms. Callum dropped to his knees and held her tightly. Juniper had been frightened because she had overheard Maribel talking about a woman meeting her father. In the innocent mind of an 8-year-old, that meant her father might find a new family and forget about her. She had run away from Maribel's house, following the route she remembered from school, until a kind bus driver recognized her and brought her to the restaurant after finding Callum's name in her backpack. The entire room watched as Callum held his daughter against his chest. Seraphina slowly stood. At that moment, the restaurant manager approached Callum with an apologetic look. The manager explained that someone had recognized Juniper outside and had already called the authorities. Everything was under control. But Callum barely heard him. He was focused only on his daughter. Juniper was whispering into her father's shoulder, terrified that he would leave her someday. Callum closed his eyes. He had spent years trying to protect his daughter from pain, but he suddenly realized that he had never told her the one thing she needed to hear most: she would never have to compete with anyone for his love. He gently held her face in his hands and reassured her with every expression he could give, promising her that nothing and no one could ever take her place. She was not an obstacle to his happiness. She was the reason he still knew what happiness meant. The room had become completely silent. Then something unexpected happened. Seraphina walked toward them, but she did not try to interrupt. She simply crouched a few feet away and placed her handbag on the floor. She looked at Juniper with compassion, not jealousy. She had understood something in that moment. Callum was not a broken man searching for someone to repair him. He was a father who had survived something devastating and had built a life around protecting the person he loved most. But there was another surprise waiting. Seraphina admitted that she had almost cancelled the date before arriving. She had recently lost her own younger sister and had been struggling with the fear that she would never feel connected to anyone again. She had come to the restaurant because someone convinced her that meeting another person who had experienced loss might help her remember that life could still hold unexpected moments. Callum looked at her differently then. For the first time that evening, he was no longer thinking about dating. He was thinking about two wounded people sitting in the same room, both carrying memories they could not change. Instead of finishing dinner, Callum did something that shocked everyone. He stood, took his wallet from his pocket, and quietly paid for meals at every occupied table in the restaurant. The manager was stunned. The customers stared. Callum had never been a wealthy man. He had spent years counting every dollar before buying groceries. Yet that night, he wanted everyone in the room to remember something. People could be carrying invisible pain. The couple celebrating an anniversary might have spent years fighting to stay together. The elderly man eating alone might have buried his wife that morning. The young waitress might be working 2 jobs to care for a sick parent. The mother sitting near the window might be wondering how she would pay next month's rent. Nobody knew what another person was carrying. Callum's gesture was not about money. It was about kindness. He had arrived at the restaurant expecting to decide whether he wanted another chance at love. Instead, he discovered that love was much bigger than romance. It was the way he held Juniper. It was the way Seraphina understood without demanding anything. It was the kindness of a bus driver who stopped to help a frightened child. It was the restaurant manager who treated a struggling father with dignity. And sometimes, love was simply choosing to make someone else's difficult day a little easier. Later that evening, Juniper sat beside Seraphina while Callum gathered their things. The little girl was still cautious, but her fear had faded. Seraphina did not try to become part of their family that night. She did not force a relationship or make promises she could not keep. Instead, she simply walked beside them toward the door. Outside, the sun had almost disappeared, leaving the sky painted in soft orange and purple. Callum looked at his daughter, then at Seraphina, and realized something he had not felt in years. Hope. Not certainty. Not a perfect future. Just hope. Months passed. Callum and Seraphina did not rush into anything. They became friends first. She learned that Juniper hated broccoli, loved astronomy, and was terrified of thunderstorms. Callum learned that Seraphina collected old postcards and always became emotional when she heard piano music. Little by little, their separate worlds began touching. Seraphina never tried to replace Juniper's mother. Callum never asked her to forget her sister. They simply made room for each other's memories. One afternoon, Juniper came home from school carrying a piece of paper. She had drawn 3 people standing underneath a giant yellow sun. There was Callum, herself, and Seraphina. At the bottom, she had written a few simple words about what family meant to her. It did not say that family had to look a certain way. It said that family was where people stayed. Callum stared at the drawing for a long time. Then he quietly wiped away a tear. He finally understood that moving forward did not mean leaving the past behind. It meant carrying the past with you while still allowing yourself to walk towards something beautiful. A year after the blind date, Callum returned to the same restaurant with Juniper and Seraphina. The manager recognized them immediately. The table where everything had changed was still there. This time, there were no nerves. No awkward silence. No fear of what might happen next. There was simply a family sharing dinner beneath the warm evening lights. Callum looked around the room and remembered the frightened father who had walked through those doors 12 months earlier. He remembered believing that his life was already finished, that happiness belonged to people who had not suffered as much as he had. He had been wrong. Sometimes life does not give us back what we lost. Sometimes it gives us something different. Something unexpected. Something we never knew we needed. And sometimes the person who arrives through a blind date is not there to save you. They are there to remind you that your heart is still capable of opening. Callum had gone to that restaurant expecting a date. He left with something far more powerful. He left with hope. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to Epic Story Hub for more stories that remind us that kindness still matters. And before the story ends, I want you to do something special. Comment the word hope if you believe that even after heartbreak, people deserve another chance at happiness. Your comment might be exactly what someone reading it needs to see today. Because sometimes, we never know how close another person is to giving up. A small act of kindness can stop someone from falling. A second chance can change a life. And one unexpected moment can remind a wounded heart that the story is not over yet. For Callum, the blind date was never really about finding someone. It was about discovering that after everything he had lost, his heart still had room for love. And sometimes, that is the most beautiful surprise life can give us.